My name's Mitch, and this is Apocalypse Prep, the show that gets your people and your community ready for anything. Hey everybody, May 11th, 1907, three men took a walk through Saint-Pierre on Martinique. Or at least the remains of Saint-Pierre, because 3 days before that, Mount Pelé had erupted in the worst volcanic disaster of the 20th century, burying the entire city under what volcanologists love to call a pyroclastic flow. That meant there were no survivors. The three men were surrounded by 30,000 corpses. So they were astonished to hear shouts. They were afraid it was a ghost, but when they explored, they found one prisoner alive in one cell. Badly burned, but breathing, talking. How did he survive? Louie Auguste Boris. And more importantly, how can you learn from him to survive yourself when something like that happens to you? Here's the thing. Your brain, as it is currently constructed, will try to kill you after a disaster. Your job is to reboot it, make it think differently so that it will be on your side and help you survive. That's right now on Apocalypse Prep. In May 1902, Louie Auguste got drunk, got in a sword fight, got arrested, thrown in jail, escaped from jail, turned himself back in, got thrown into solitary confinement. He was a lucky bastard, that guy. At the same time, Saint-Pierre, the town he was in, the biggest city in Martinique, was being swollen by refugees who were all coming in to escape from Mount Pelé, the volcano that had been erupting at a low level for a while now. It was also being inundated by a plague of giant centipedes and pit vipers that already killed 50 people that were also coming to town to get away from the volcano. It was quite a party this place was having. The morning, though, of May 8th, 1902, around 7:53 a.m., all of it ceased to matter, because just then Mount Pelé exploded for real. And within 1 minute, this volcano sent a blast of hot rocks, the pyroclastic flow, 10 kilometers to hit the city of Saint-Pierre, destroying all of it and killing 40,000 people. And just at that moment, Louie Auguste Boris was on fire in there. I know. You're going to say, Mitch, the only reason he survives is because he was in the giant jail cell made of rock. I hear you, but here's the thing. It's totally true that nobody who felt the full force of that blast would survive. But there were people all over Saint-Pierre who were in other buildings or secluded behind walls or on boats that managed to survive that first blast of heat, but still died afterwards. All of them died, except for Louie Auguste Boris. So let's dig into why. He did three things really fast. Number one, he didn't breathe. Number two, he got his flaming clothes off immediately, dunked them in his water bowl, and wrapped them around his face. And number three, classy show here, when he ran out of water, took his dick out, he pissed on the rest of his clothes, and he shoved them in his window and under his door to keep the rest of the hot air from getting in as much as possible. So when the men found him several days later raving, he was burned all over his body, scalded and oozing, except his face. And you're listening and you're thinking, oh yeah, totally. That sounds like that's what I would do too. Yeah, absolutely. If I were in a volcano, I'd get my clothes off, I'd absolutely piss on stuff, I'd be fine. Yeah, but the thing is, most people weren't. Here are the three ways everybody else died if they didn't die in the initial blast. Number one, they took burns to their face they couldn't recover from. Number two, their burning clothes melted into their skin. Number three, they breathed in the hot, searing air and scalded their lungs. This was called swallowing the fire. It took a few days to kill you, but it did. So, when the three men found Louie Auguste, he was something of an anomaly. They didn't know what to do with him, but he was plainly injured. He needed help. And so they took him to Le Morne Rouge, where a Catholic priest named Father Mary had set up kind of a rescue station. And you never believe it, it's even crazier what happens to him next. So let's talk about your brain on stress. Your brain, it follows something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. That is, as it gets a little more stressed, the performance actually improves for a while, and then as you hit more stress, it starts to degrade until it gets to what David Grossman in his book On Combat called the gray or black area. That's essentially where you curl up in a fetal position and basically die. So we want to avoid that. So what gets you there? What pushes you over the edge? It can be noise, heat, time pressure, loud noises, all these things that happen in a disaster increase your stress more and more. And your brain starts shutting down. First, you get something called tunnel vision, where your line of sight actually narrows and you can't accurately assess your surroundings anymore. Then your working memory collapses. So maybe day to day, you can remember 7 or 8 numbers, you can remember a phone number. In a disaster, you're likely to remember like 2. You get dumber, basically. You also stick to old patterns because you can't figure out what to do next. So that's why in a disaster, people have this period of hesitation where they kind of mill around, unsure what to do. That's how a lot of people die. And finally, because we're a classy show, I just want to tell you that you're also probably going to piss yourself and or shit yourself. Don't worry about it. It's just something that happens because of how much your brain loves you and cares for you. Just expect that that's going to come. So in her book, The Unthinkable, Amanda Ripley calls this your disaster personality, like a new version of you that you meet in a disaster. The problem is, from my point of view, this new version of you is like actively trying to kill you. So the question is, how do you reboot your brain so that it is on your side? May 8th, 1902 was also the Feast of the Ascension. So Father Mary's church was packed that morning when the volcano erupted. And every person in that church was sure that they were going to die because Le Morne Rouge, his village, was only 4 kilometers from the summit of Mount Pelé. They all said their goodbyes. But then miraculously, they didn't die. They survived. The blast destroyed Saint-Pierre, and in Le Morne Rouge, that was taken as the grace of God, right? They celebrated the miracle that had happened. And then they moved into response mode as refugees and the injured trickled in from other parts of the island. By the time Louie Auguste Boris got there 7 days later, Father Mary had been working rescue ops for a week straight. Food, shelter, what medical care he could. He was exhausted. But he still took the time to welcome and treat this new survivor. Louie Auguste Boris was a black man in a racist French colony. Nobody had ever given him a chance. But in Father Mary, he found someone who showed him kindness and respect. He helped Louie Auguste learn to read. They read the scriptures together. Louie Auguste became a Christian. And at the end of a few weeks, Louie Auguste said to Father Mary, "Let me stay with you and be your servant." And Father Mary accepted. The volcano kept erupting at low levels throughout this whole time, and finally Le Morne Rouge decided to evacuate. As a body of people, they went down the mountain and into Fort de France, the capital of Martinique, where they would be safe, and for just a little while it looked like all of them might survive. And then the asshole, brand new acting governor of Martinique got tired of seeing refugees lining his beautiful, beautiful city streets, and he decreed that the only way to get any more volcano aid would be to go back to the village that you came from. Father Mary said, "But Governor, Le Morne Rouge is 4 kilometers from Mount Pelé. If we go back there, you are signing our death warrant." But the governor was unmoved. And the villagers, they needed their next meal. And so they went back up the mountain, back to the village. And Father Mary was their priest, and so he went with them to take care of them. And Louie Auguste Boris, he had had enough. He didn't want to go back near that mountain. He stayed. It was a few weeks later, Le Morne Rouge was back. Father Mary was back in the middle of the night, August 20th. 3 French soldiers look up and they see the mountain explode. They jumped on their horses, flew to the village to warn them. 2 of them were incinerated on the run. One of them lived long enough to shout a warning in the streets before he collapsed and died. It woke up Father Mary. He jumped up, ran for the church so he could open it as a shelter. He knew that the village would burn and that the stone church was the best chance that people had. He made it about halfway before the blast caught him and knocked him down, and he couldn't help it. He opened his mouth and he gasped, and he breathed in the flames, swallowing the fire. Still, he staggered to the church. He opened it up. He ushered the townsfolk inside. He spent all night treating the injured and blessing the dying until finally the next morning he collapsed and was carried in a litter back to Fort de France, where he died. At his funeral, there were thousands of people from around Martinique who came to celebrate his work as a priest and his heroism after volcanic eruption after volcanic eruption. He had saved his people multiple times, gave everything he had until he couldn't give anything more. His coffin was carried by 8 black men from the island as a gesture of honor towards someone who had showed them respect. All right, so let's talk about how to reboot your brain. The thing is, your brain really doesn't want to kill you. That's not what it's trying to do. What it's trying to do is kind of like slow you down so that your death is more pleasant for you. It's kind of being nice to you. It's just trying to shut down your system so that you don't notice death as much. So it doesn't share your goal, essentially. It sounds silly, but that means the first thing that you need to do is tell your brain that you are going to survive. You have to reframe the problem that you are facing as survivable so that your brain starts to get on your side. Once you reframe the problem, your next step is to actively imagine a way out of the situation, a pathway that your brain can follow. So the problem there is that you're being flooded with all of these stress hormones, and your brain doesn't know how to work in those conditions. So there's a way to help that. David Grossman calls it operant conditioning. It's used a lot in the military now. Essentially, that is putting your brain through really stressful training exercises over and over so that it gets used to working in those conditions. I'm talking about exercises with live fire where people are actually shooting at each other, that kind of thing. By living in that stress, your brain gets used to it and it gets better able to work in those conditions. That maybe not the most fun thing to do with your brain. The last one is a little more pleasant, and that's mindfulness meditation. It turns out that doing breathing exercises and working on awareness expands your general capacity of neurons in your brain. And that lets you, when disasters hit, do better at things like working memory and fighting tunnel vision. So by practicing mindfulness, you kind of expand your capacity to work in these crisis environments. So you've got 3 tools to play with. First, you're reframing the problem as solvable. Second, you're creating an imaginary map out of the situation, which requires some pre-training. And third, you are, through mindfulness, expanding your capacity in order to give yourself sort of more brain space to figure out the crisis when it happens. After Father Mary's funeral, Louie Auguste got the hell off of Martinique. He was famous now. And everybody wanted to meet him. Barnum and Bailey hired him, toured him around the world as Samson, the only human man strong enough to survive a volcano. He made some money for a while until public interest faded, and he died in poverty in Panama sometime between 1929 and 1955. We're not really sure. So, Louie Auguste Boris, Father Mary. To you folks, they don't seem that similar, right? A guy born into poverty and racism, grew up to be a criminal, a respected Catholic priest. What's the connection? And the connection is that both of them had brains that were trained to work under stress. Think about it. Both of their lives were marinated in stress, having to make decisions with few resources, with high consequences. Could be life or death, could get you thrown into jail. How am I going to eat that night? How am I going to help my parishioners survive? This ongoing stress trained their brains so that when the big crisis hit, they were ready for it. They weren't distracted by the fear and the angst that hit them. They just made decisions and acted. And that similarity is where the power comes from. If you can train your brain to function through fear, you will be better able to survive, just like Louie Auguste Boris. And if you can train your brain to function through fear and focus on serving others, That's your first step to becoming a hero, just like Father Mary. Either way, you're gaining a superpower, which is a brain that is ready to face stress. Whatever shit life throws at you, your brain is going to be better able to adapt and grow and learn and act, and not have to huddle there in the fear and the angst of the everyday. And that ability to work through stress is something we all need to be successful. And when the volcano goes off, goddamn, it's going to help you then too. Okay, homework. So for the last 2 shows, I've given you basically a party for homework, so I think it's a little too much of that. I think we need to chill out a little bit. And besides, this whole Go Team model is not going to work if everybody on your team essentially freaks out at the first sign of danger. So the homework today is essentially between you and your brain. To get you guys basically on the same page, I want you to do 2 kinds of exercises. The first one is a mindfulness meditation exercise. So this researcher, Amici Jha, working with the military, proved that 4 weeks of mindful meditation practice will enhance your working memory in combat conditions, and so by extension in disasters. And so what I want you to do involves a rule of 4. For 4 weeks, I want you to do 4 minutes a day of mindfulness meditation where you breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds. So in those 4 minutes, the way it works is as thoughts come to you, you kind of note them and let them go. And oh my God, just Google mindfulness meditation. I'm not like your therapist or something like that. I'm just here to tell you, you need to do 4 weeks of mindfulness meditation before it does you any good in a crisis. Got that? Okay, so exercise 2. I am so sorry, but what I need you to do for exercise 2 is to imagine yourself and the people you love in a terrible, painful situation. I need you to imagine yourselves in crisis and taking damage with all the blood and pain that implies. Okay? And then what I need you to imagine is those folks working together to get out of that situation and surviving and thriving afterwards. And I need you to do that over and over. I need you to dip your brain into this kind of pure stress of this imaginary disaster, and then I need you to work your way out of it, solving it. You probably don't have access to like live fire exercises like in the army, but this is a virtual imaginary way of teaching your brain that you can go into these terrible situations and you can come out again, all right? So that it learns the lesson that this stuff is survivable, and it gives you more imaginary capacity when something bad actually does happen, okay? So the point of these 2 exercises is to give you the ability in a disaster to reboot your brain so that it will stand on your side where it should be and to help you to survive. By the way, you may be saying to yourself, okay, now I know how to reboot my brain. What do I tell it to do? Spoiler alert, you're never going to know exactly what to do, so you're going to have to improvise. Next time on Apocalypse Prep.